Hi all, hope you can hear me okay. I'm Andy and I'm from Signoi, which is a tech firm, an analytics firm in the UK. And I'm here to talk about one of the more interesting recent developments, which is what we call AIBODS, essentially AI-powered audience simulation models. Essentially, and I'm going to rattle through this because I know Ray is going to send out the presentation in detail. Essentially, it's based around the concept of personas, which are essentially well liked within the market research and advertising sector and represent archetypal target audiences. Now, historically, they've been quite time consuming to generate and rather static, although quite inspiring for their clients. Now, with the various forms of AI now available, we can actually use those tools to create accurate lifelike simulations that you can actually interact with. And I'll stress right now that we now have 8 clients on the books already, big brands, using this tool, interacting with them, actually doing research with them. So I want to talk a little bit as we go through about not only the principles, but also the proof points. In other words, how do we know that this stuff actually works? So here's the why. Creating personas is, quite a tedious and involved process, right? So the AI-driven approach basically takes a whole load of data, and that could be information about market segments, something that a lot of clients come to us with. How do we bring our segments to life and make them live longer, make them be more interesting with the organization? And it can be done at pace and scale. So we have clients with 100 different personas, 40, 60 different personas, some as small as 3 or 4. It all depends how they see their kind of core consumer audience. But ultimately, once they're built, people have the ability to ask them pretty much anything, actually. And they all have their own personalities. Like I say, they're like archetypes of consumers. But ultimately, what we're seeing already is that this is saving researchers, both agency side and client side, significant time and money, doing loads of concept tests, using them in workshops, generating ideas, that sort of thing. They work partly because they're very richly detailed. So your typical brand will have a huge amount of data about their segments. But the thing to note really is that any segmentation has a lot of variability within a segment. So this approach helps to take us beyond the idea of a persona that represents the whole of a segment to several different personas operating in a kind of communitarian way to represent all of the variability within that segment. Built, we set up and train a chat zone, and this operates at several different levels. There's stuff that the client can then interact directly with their personas on. So they might ask them qualitative questions. They might ask them quantitative questions for that matter. They might ask them to do a survey. So there's lots of different interaction modes. Probably the crucial thing is that in the interactions, there's also a kind of background model which we use as a service to do more complicated things. So what are people actually using them for? Well, point one is elevation, really. So you spend a load of money on research. How do we get more ROI from it? Some of that is, elevating insights from all of that existing data. Some of it is actually to be able to do more research with that same audience and be confident that within its boundaries, it's going to be answering in the right way because it's an extrapolation process, essentially. So it allows research to live longer. To that end, we've had a number of clients actually put tactical research projects on hold while they test these models. And that, I think, has some interesting implications to the research industry. Second point really is about iteration. They really don't get bored, do they? They're relentless, these AIs. They'll answer anything you throw at them, and they're incredibly articulate. So that allows people to ask hundreds of questions, not just a few. Third point, create. It allows, particularly in the context of workshops and so on, it allows clients to get more ideas out of their audience faster. And they can be quite endlessly surprising in terms of co-creation, whether it's comms, concepts, products, even cultural insights. So you might start with a segmentation, and I've picked on one that we made earlier, trendy fun seekers, and it is a thing that exists actually in the Gen Z audience, and it's of particular interest actually to alcoholic drinks brands. I can't imagine why, but there you go. So the first thing to do is essentially synthesize all that and create, the background profile of that segment in some detail. And this is a snapshot of some of the information about this segment, its cultural values, its beliefs, its attitudes. The next step is to personify that segment. And in this instance, and it does have a point of view on this, it insisted on at least 4 personas to represent this segment and its different flavors. Within Gen Z, you've got 4 here, and they have different kind of priorities, values, behaviors, backgrounds, and so on and so forth. Now, clearly that's not representing an entire respondent sample, but what it is doing is representing the variability within the segment to quite a high degree. And I tend to think of this as an 80% solution. More on this 80% matter shortly. Then off you go and you chat with them. So as I say, it's very relevant to alcoholic drinks brands, this particular archetypal set of AIBODS. So they start to ask you questions about what kind of cocktails each persona likes, what are their favorite spirits brands, what's a good night out to them, all of that kind of stuff. And it plays back and extrapolates from all of the things that we've trained it on. So I must admit, it rather surprised me to have so many clients kind of going for this so early, actually, because surely the big question is, can we trust them? Can you actually trust what these things are saying? Well, the answer essentially is, as long as you've got high quality data that goes in, then yeah, it performs very well. Same old principle with research, isn't it? Garbage in, garbage out. So we try not to feed it too much rubbish from bots. But with the right data, we find that it can replicate consumer ratings, for example, of concepts to a really high level of accuracy. So I would put it this way: we've always used simulations in market research. This kind of approach just takes it to the next level. So I just want to touch on a couple of proof points. Nothing too heavy, but proof point number 1, we built a model for a retailer and did not include any of their concept test data. We then took that concept test data, strap lines, brand ideas, communications, etc., and compared what our model had to say to what the actual research that they did had to say. So the concept test data not in the model training, really high correlation between the simulation and the real research. Makes you wonder really if they could have perhaps saved some money there. This is often the thinking. So for simple tasks, can be super accurate. In fact, I'm not going to digress too much into the world of market research, but who is to say which measure is actually correct or nearest to the truth, the research or the model? To be discussed. We also tested it against fictitious concepts, so things that simply don't exist in the marketplace, and then compared it to some omnibus research. Again, very, very high level of accuracy coming through here. You can also use it for quant, because every time you ask a particular persona a question, it might deviate a little bit. It's rather like asking a real human being on Thursday what they think, and then getting a slightly different answer on Saturday. So you start to build up a distribution across an enhanced sample size, which allows you to quant with relatively small numbers of personas. Not too small, but relatively small. Here's another example. Our client was actually testing 54 separate products here. They did it with a max diff exercise, I think. Yes, max diff. Quite expensive, you could probably imagine. So in parallel, we ran that through their AIBODS model. Again, you can see the predictivity here. So the max diff product scores on the horizontal, the simulation scores on the vertical. Strikes me, if they're looking for winners, they could have just done this first and cut out a load of products, right? So it's very amenable to quant, and you can put questionnaires through it in the background, and it will deliver a data sheet following the routing just as a human being would do through an online survey. And of course, the nature of, chatty AIs generally, be it Claude or GPT, all of the things that we tend to feed into these models are great at giving qualitative feedback, because it's all about words, isn't it? But it's also really interesting to see that numerical validation. But going back to words, one of our clients, William Grants, wanted to understand the resonance of lots of different messages with their target personas. So they didn't quite trust it yet. They did some qual, and they did a parallel exercise with our model, and it was absolutely bang on. So to me, the proof point is, excuse me, just number one, it works, and we've kind of maybe overdone the proof points here, but it works. And number two, people are actually using it. I'm not saying they're using it exclusively, because of course you wouldn't necessarily want to do a foundational piece of research using an AI simulation, but certainly for things like concept tests, ideation, simple questionnaires, making the most of research that's already been done, it seems to be picking up pace, both in terms of the private models, which are very specific to an individual client, but also the general models, which are pre-built, available to use for anybody. And in fact, when Ray sends out his pack, you will actually be able to play with one, because I put a link in there to an open chatbot, which can be quite fun.
Hi, Andy. That's a little bit over 10 mins, so I think we'll stop there if that's okay.
Yep, that's no problem.
And people will be able to do the demo from this link here. So let's throw that open to questions. And I'm going to get the ball rolling while people type them into either the chat or the Q&A tool. So when you say you're testing concepts, are you showing pictures or diagrams, or are these in Word format?
Lots of them in Word format, but we also now, through the other platform that we've got, which is basically quantitative semiotics, we're also testing visual advertising material or visual campaign material, or a kind of combination of the two.
Great. So somebody has got their hand up, but there's not actually anything we can do with that. So then if you, and whoever the two of you are, if you want to type your question into chat, if you're happy for everyone to see the question, or type it into the Q&A tool, in which case Andy and I will see the question, and then we can move from there. So Andy, are you using one of the well-known platforms, or are you building something from, say, a llama or something like that?
Well, good question. So we try all of them actually, and some of it depends on client preferences. So if they want a thing in a box, right, that doesn't interact with any APIs, that's more of the offline llama configuration. Most of them are not too bothered about that, so we'll tend to call on either Claude, the latest model's really super duper actually, or the usual suspect, Chatty Boy, GPT-4o.
Yes, I mean, it's a very popular option, has to be said. We've got a question in the Q&A here. In what context have you found it not to work as well as other contexts?
Yeah, I've resisted doing what I might call foundational research with these models, right? And I've also found that if you're not careful and you don't keep feeding them new information, right, then they will slip out of date. And that could be about cultural context. I'll give you, for example, we have a building society client, amazingly, financial services, who's using it to simulate first-time buyers, right? So they've got a few segments there. So I know culturally I've got to update that next week, or the week after next, depending on the outcome of a certain election, and the likely changes in interest rates and all that sort of thing. So it's got to be a living thing, I suppose, is what I'm saying. It's not just a kind of, there's your model, see you next week, next year.
Okay, we've got lots of questions. Let's rattle through them as quick as we can. And then any that we can't do, I'm sure if you were to contact Andy and Signoi directly, they would answer them. Where do you get the data from? What sort of data? What sort of volumes that you're feeding?
Okay, so a lot of it, this originated for us in the world of segmentation. These were the first projects we started to do, where clients actually have a lot of data, right? And they've got good profiles there, segments. They've got good qual research with real people in those segments. And that's an absolute goldmine of data, right? We've also got clients who are very data light, actually. So they might need to use things like social conversations to try to build personas, which is, to me, a little bit less quality. The gold standard, I think, has to be in research. I come from a research background, as you know, Ray. So as for quantity, it's not always a case of more is better. You tend to get a law of diminishing returns the more you put in. You get a kind of asymptotic kind of decay of uplift in data quality, in response quality. So we tend to stop at a certain point and say, well, let's not boil the ocean here, right? And also really crucially, let's always leave some research studies aside for your validation.
Absolutely. So, how do you determine how many personas to build for a given segment?
Well, it will tell us, right? So it will tell us based on how variable or diffuse it thinks a segment is. And this is part of our kind of algorithm before we even get into the world of simulations. It's like, it's a measurement of variability, isn't it? So if you've got a segment, we have got a segment which is like, basically busy women, aged 25 to 55, right? That tells you not a great deal, right? Now, obviously, there's attitudinal stuff behind that as well, but it also tells you you're going to need more personas intuitively to represent the sweep of that kind of quite diffuse segment to represent reality.
Can you give an idea of cost? Do we subscribe to a set of personas, or whatever?
There's two elements to it, really. One is subscription to pre-built models. Okay, so expanding our pre-built models out of Gen Z into national representative of the UK, or as best as we can, right? And then move beyond that. And those are really aimed at subscriptions. Now, then at the individual client level, what happens is that there's a build cost, right? Send us all your data, so that becomes a different kind of model altogether rather than the general models. And then there's the client will license those to use them going forward. The absolute cost does vary quite a lot, but it's not horrifying. Our typical build cost has been in the range of, in sterling, 8,500 to 25,000. And the license costs are negligible in that context, really, because once they're up and running, they're up and running. And what does make a difference is how often we need to update them, feed them new stuff.
Yep. So there's a question I don't quite understand, so you might see it in chat, regarding the gold mine of data. Could you repeat the name, please?
Oh, the gold mine. The gold mine.
Oh, right.
Yeah, I was just basically what I was saying is that, if clients are coming with a ready-made, high-quality, recent segmentation that they know a lot about, okay, that to me is a gold standard of good data to build these things.
Okay, will new personas be added into the mix as more information is added, questions asked, etc.? What kinds of evolution in the personas have you seen with the additional of information, or how stable are the personas?
Early days, that's the short answer. Early days. I suspect they will evolve. Because, I mean, if I take our Gen Z, and Pinterest have got their own version of that. Yeah, it's another of our big clients, right? I know that that's going to evolve. Okay, I know it's going to evolve because the cohort evolves.
Yes.
Right? They age. New characters come in. New technology comes in. New enthusiasms. New fashions come in. Right. So that will undoubtedly evolve. If I think about IT directors, which is one of those abstruse B2B type personas, maybe not so much, but that then obviously feeds into things like cybersecurity trends, etc., etc. But I honestly think it's too early to say. I mean, these things have only been bubbling around for, 9 months or so, really, in any meaningful form.
Yeah. So, final questions. We're running out of time. What about emerging markets? So if you have a country which is not particularly internet connected savvy, do you think the same approaches can work? Let's say um, Pakistan or something like this.
Yeah, short answer is I'm not so sure, right? Now, again, if you've got good data, it's certainly worth a shot, right? But the reality is that I mean, there's other models coming that could help us along the way on this, but my general sense, well, it's a fact, isn't it, that the large language models are essentially Western oriented, highly Western oriented.
Yeah.
In fact, if you really want to labour the point, they're West Coast oriented.
Mhm.
Okay, so and you have to control for that, and I actually do find you have to control for that at the persona build stage, right? Otherwise, the first persona that comes out is a software engineer in Seattle. So they can be actually quite dim, these AIs. But I'm currently not using it in markets like Pakistan. We do have variants in China, right? But that's because the client knows a lot about their target segments in China, and they also have a big book of what you need to know about the culture in China as regards this particular type of product, jewelry product, is Swarovski, right? So
All right.
you know, it depends what you know that can help it along, I think is the short answer.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Andy. That was fantastic.